So the themes that I want to touch on in this presentation really draw on this textbook that I finished and published just in the summer, which was really about challenges of security in a complex world, and thinking about kind of common issues and approaches, whether we're working at the international level, regionally, nationally, locally, etc. So I just want to begin framing the presentation in terms of some of the key challenges facing the police at this juncture, introduce the concept of the fourth industrial revolution, and touch on issues relating to the future of work, which relates very much to a passion of mine, which is of course education, and police education now being a really big part of what we're doing at UWL. Talk about some features of the changing profile of crime and how the landscape is evolving for the police to mitigate, and security as well. And then I want to introduce what's described as complexity theory or complexity thinking, and becoming the focus of common conversations across disciplines, and starting to offer some ideas really about how we all must adapt to an increasingly globalized, technologically advanced world. So, you know, it's been interesting to read the work coming from the Police Foundation, and particularly their first report. So they talk about the way that challenges to public safety and security have been transformed in the new millennium, and they identify these three interconnected forces of technological change, globalization, and the rise of more complex social problems. So a much more complex landscape for the police to navigate, new demands, new pressures, great volume of demands, and they recognise in this review that some profound thinking needs to happen about how police evolve for the future. So here you have quite a nice diagram that illustrates what the fourth industrial revolution is all about. And I was delighted when I first heard of the concept, because it's a useful sort of wraparound expression for the era we're entering into, and the impact of a variety of transformative technologies that together represent massive change in the landscape. And so you see how we've evolved as the world's experienced the development of steam power, then electricity, then electronics, and now this heavily digitized and digitizing high-tech world, and a world characterized by advanced robotics, Internet of Things technologies, big data, artificial intelligence. All of these things will face the implications of quantum computing. In 10 years or so, have to prepare for that, and a society that's changing at a faster speed than most people can really keep up with. This, of course, has most impact for us individually in terms of the future of work and the police workforce, our focus today. And this is an employer survey that's carried out periodically by the World Economic Forum with employers. And they identified in the latest publication that the workforce is automating faster than expected. So, you know, with a real change in the nature of jobs, many jobs being displaced, but other jobs being created to prepare for that more transformed world. And COVID, of course, has pushed that digitalization along. And there will be inequalities in who benefits, who suffers from these developments. So there need to be adaptations that take account of that. For us as employees and employers, we need to think about the top skills that will be needed in the future, And the latest survey focuses on analytical thinking, creativity, and flexibility as the top skill areas likely to be required for 2025. Reskilling and upskilling will be key, both for individuals and organisations. And that's going to apply to the majority of us. So, as I said, police officers as well. So the PEQF has come at an important juncture, and will operate as a foundation for both the development of individuals and the development of police officers, police forces going forwards. I just want to touch on a few examples of the many different types of cybercrime that are challenging us today. And a really interesting development has been finally the inclusion of fraud and what are described as computer misuse offences in the national crime figures. So perhaps be interesting to compare notes internationally on how well different countries are taking account of this. But it's been impossible really to measure the extent of cybercrime and fraud in the police recorded crime statistics. And this data relies on the Crime in England and Wales household survey. And so estimates are made of the extent of fraud and what we might call cyber dependent crimes that can only happen through the use of computers, like ransomware, malware, phishing attacks, etc. So you can here represents the emergence on the graph of fraud and computer misuse offences. And this data from the Office for National Statistics brings it to life, indicating, for example, that the average resident in England and Wales is now 20 times more likely to experience fraud than robbery, and 10 times more likely to experience fraud than theft from the person. So we do have an imbalance when we're still policing these physical crimes, but the protection and the support for cyber crimes is minimal. This is also affecting a different demographic of people. So traditional street crimes or volume crimes bear most heavily on young people, urban residents, and manual workers or unemployed people, whereas fraud is more likely to affect rural residents, so people who are kind of less crime savvy, not used to confronting it every day, middle-aged people, and people in managerial and professional positions who are doing work on the computer every day. And then thinking about what is the future going to look like, these are just going to become more refined and effective in the future, harnessing these new technologies and giving offenders the chance to scale up their scams even more and increase the sophistication of those scams. And then just the other one I wanted to touch on is online harassment and cyberbullying, just to illustrate how these unpleasant aspects of life for many people have shifted to the online environment. And this is not necessarily all for the police to deal with, but it just illustrates the shifts within a common social problem. So online harassment and cyberbullying can take many forms, upsetting messages, issues like cyber flashing and revenge pornography, where the law in this country is just starting to catch up, and no doubt there will be legislative gaps all around the world for those types of crimes. Identity theft, doxing, which is sharing people's information online, and cyber stalking. something that seriously impacts children as well as adults. And you know, just thinking about the impact of that, it may be worse for children than traditional violent face-to-face bullying, because you know, it's difficult to get away from the internet. So you know, it really is something that we need to look at a lot more. Just want to lift the focus up now to the global stage, and I've been reading the 4 yearly reports by the US National Intelligence Council called Global Trends. They come out usually just before a new presidential inauguration. It was a bit late last year. And there is an equivalent UK one called Global Strategic Trends, and then others published by NATO and other countries. And you know, these are really interesting in giving us a bit of a chance to take stock of the major challenges in the world and how they may evolve in the future. So this latest report is grounded in these 5 themes. So first of all, it points to more shared global challenges. So problems like the pandemic and these kind of big issues are predicted to arise with increasing frequency and intensity, which is inevitable in a more connected, interconnected, complex world, but they may relate to climate change, disease once more, financial crises, or technology disruptions, for example. So really different to the security challenges of past years, because they often lack a direct human perpetrator, and then it's difficult to predict how they're going to evolve, so they can intersect and cascade in unpredictable ways. Fragmentation is identified as a major challenge, you know, and we see that across the world as the internet gives a voice to everybody, including quite negative forces. So we're starting to see a more fragmented world, and this can be a challenge whether it's at international level, national level, or community level. And then the report identifies a disequilibrium. So what we might call the international system is becoming less and less of a system as time goes on, as the relative power of other actors grows. So we're not set up for these complex shared and cascading problems. You know, working to find the right solutions is a challenge. Going back to my book, what I'm trying to show there is that the same problems are happening at different kind of levels of strategy and policy and practice. So what can we take from other areas of security thinking and practice? Linked to fragmentation and disequilibrium, the NIC also highlight greater contestation within communities. So certainly around whether it's at election times or over big issues like how to deal with COVID at the present time. And then finally, they identify adaptation as the key priority for the many actors in the system and the basis for future advantage. So the states that will be most successful will be those that are most adaptable. But that's certainly a recommendation that we could extrapolate to any area of delivery of policies and practices, including our own, what we can control as individuals in our professional remits. Another body of work that I'm finding really interesting now comes out of the University of Cambridge's Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, which sounds like a really fun place to work. So they too talk about the kind of big issues around the corner. which might be tipping points in the natural order due to climate change or mass biodiversity loss. The spectre of AI, if it's used maliciously or accidentally in a harmful way. And then the risks presented by advanced biotechnologies, natural or engineered pandemics, and then the potential risks posed by nuclear weapons getting into the wrong hands or used accidentally. So just coming on to my last theme, which is complexity, and trying to give you a kind of whirlwind tour of some of the contributions from this literature, which is spreading across different disciplines. So coming to the social sciences relatively late, and ideas being imported from the natural sciences. And if you think about ecological systems, for example, what those kind of studies can give us and can be applied elsewhere. So it's come from many different directions. It might be considered as a subset of systems theory. So looking at how the behavior of a system operates in terms of its constituent components and interrelationships between those components. And one type of system within systems theory is known as a non-linear dynamical system. So, if you think about the example of the butterfly effect, it's the idea that a small change can have a massive disproportionate impact, like the flapping of a butterfly's wings leading to a cyclone. And then they refer also to a complex adaptive system as one type of non-linear dynamical system, where there's such intricacy between the components parts that it's difficult to predict how things are going to play out. There are multiple variables at work, and you're just looking at the holistic sum of all of the behaviors embedded within. It can be something that's located within the body, like an immune system, right through to a traffic system, ecosystem, weather system, or economy, for instance. So it's not so much a theory, as it's often called, but it's really an umbrella term for all of these disparate perspectives with complexity in common. And it's a real transdisciplinary approach, and it can be used in conjunction with other more familiar theories within our disciplines if we wish to use those. There are some relevant concepts that you might have heard of. Some of these emerging quite a bit earlier than complexity theory, but Rittel and Weber, who were planners, came up with the idea of wicked problems. So ones for which there's no obvious single cause and no obvious single solution, and they identify these 10 different characteristics. So I would say any police problem that has not yet been solved would fall into the into the wicked problem category. And then some others have come up with the idea of super wicked problems. And an example of that is climate change, if you think of their key characteristics. So time's running out, those who cause the problem also seek to provide a solution. The central authority needed to address it is weak or non-existent, and irrational discounting occurs that pushes responses into the future. Other concepts include VUCA environments, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So this is sort of the external environment that we are all operating within, whether we represent a business or a public sector organization, that there are lots of uncertainties on the horizon. and that's something that has military origins but has been applied particularly within the business world. Taleb's famous notion of the black swans, although COVID isn't a black swan because it was heavily predictable. There's also the idea of normal accidents theory, pointing to the challenges of highly complex systems with tightly coupled connections and the risks of catastrophic failure. And Taleb came up with another concept, anti-fragile, you know, and that's the idea about being so well adaptive that when a disruption occurs, you actually build back stronger, and it reflects that very famous maxim of Nietzsche. So how we respond to this? Well, complex challenges require complex solutions. As I said before, and you know, what's been my focus in the book is that the same kind of trends are occurring across multiple dimensions. So this is an international relations scholar associated with bringing this idea into international relations, but drawing comparisons across other dimensions of human activity. And then I think most people here will be familiar with resilience thinking. You know, that's something that's permeated a number of different realms. It's, I think, initially was recognized as an element of psychology and health, thinking about people's personal resilience. It became popular in development circles, international development, and it's also informed national resilience agendas and organizational resilience agendas. And this is an approach that recognizes complexity and interconnectedness, and is encouraging more holistic responses, you know, try and create sustainable strategies. So they're trying to encourage bottom-up development. You know, if we're thinking about international development or international disaster risk interventions, although it's become well used, we can still point to tremendous failures. You know, the idea was to make Afghanistan resilient, and you know, very sadly, we look like we're no further forward than we were before the war in Afghanistan. So if you think about what existing security architectures look like, and counting police forces within that, they're structured around explicit role definition, bureaucratic chains of command, expert specialization, and legal hierarchies. And they deal well with complicated problems, but what about these complex cascading kind of challenges? So they really argued that we have to throw out old ways of doing things, you know, and start to look at how we build global governance structures. Again, this can be pushed outwards to other levels. And think about how to adopt an approach that's more capable of responding adequately to instability, surprise, and extraordinary change. So they don't propose completely throwing out the old ways of doing things. You know, we have these structures, we can't just dismantle them and start again. But they point out that these inherited systems and processes need to be supplemented with design principles that are better oriented to these complex problems. So some of the examples that they provide of those adaptations include ways of enhancing understandings of the problems being faced. You know, so we have this big data accessible to us. How can we mine that more effectively and start to model and analyze that data and inform our solutions in that kind of intelligent way. They also point to more effective deliberative mechanisms, so ones that do harness multiple stakeholders. And they give the example of engaging with Indigenous communities in Australia to support responses to bushfires, for example. Another one is transparency, preventing information hoarding. It's still not been agreed and established where COVID came from, and also increase government accountability, as in the case of the Paris Agreement. Then they also talk about adaptive policy responses and adaptive system design, both of which are approaches that allow for change and inquiry throughout, taking new stakeholders into account as things go. So creating solutions that are very much open to modification along the way. So I'll be interested to see what comes out of the next Police Foundation report, which promises to focus on solutions. I'm not here to say what the police should do, but rather to just provide food for thought. But just taking those 4 or 5 examples, enhancing problem understanding, we're talking about achieving smarter policing through greater use of big data analytics, effective deliberative mechanisms, pointing to greater partnership working, including working with the private sector. And that's something that I've been pleased to see wearing my other hat, working in the security community and with the private sector. Transparency. So I just took a couple of these points off the College of Policing website, but making sure all staff uphold service values, building public confidence, and making sure there's full accountability both of police and partners, and then adaptive policy responses and system design, including harnessing the PEQF to enable police forces to become learning organisations. So that's me. Thank you.
Alison, thank you so much. I'm beginning to think one of the wicked problems of organising conferences, you need to give a lot more time to passionate speakers like Alison. So, ladies and gents, any questions please for Alison?
Hi Alison, that was really fascinating. I think I just discovered that I'm working on an effective delivery mechanism at the moment, so that's so I suppose I'm not sure this is the tiny question, but really interested in the wicked problems is, and I know the College of Policing has already done some work to identify what the UK policing's wicked problems are. I just wondered whether you were cited on that at all.
Well, let me just go back. Yeah, I mean, these problems can be at the level of an intervention between 2 people, right through to a global problem. So where complexity thinking has been applied to probation and social work, for instance, if you think of the relationship between a probation officer and an offender who might have a really great productive meeting, and then the offender leaves the office and something happens that just knocks them sideways and all the good work is out the window because they're drawn back into bad networks or substance abuse or any kind of thing. So they're not problems that can be solved, can ever be solved, or they wouldn't be wicked problems. But this is really why it is about adaptation and sort of mitigating issues, and that's what we that's what we do these days. We don't talk about preventing crime so much as as we did in the 1980s, because to do so is an impossible task. We can mitigate, but we can't stop it. It just illustrates the interconnectedness of issues. So you've got around the bottom multiple stakeholders with conflicting agendas and straddle organizational and disciplinary boundaries, and every solution ramifies throughout the system. So you do one thing and you don't know what the knock-on effects are going to be, etc. So you can see why analytical thinking was one of the top skills being predicted by employers for 2025, because more of the issues that we are dealing with are complex. What the police deals with has always been complex. These aren't issues that the police can ever solve or even really get on top of alone. And so this is where being creative with other stakeholders is important. If you think about cybercrime, for example, there's a crisis in terms of people going into teaching to be computer scientists. Lots of people taking computer science degrees, but with all the money that's available in the private sector, etc., a lot of those computer science degrees are not being put to use in schools. And so we're not fully educating the next generation on how to confront a digitizing society. And so, wouldn't it be much better if those kids were properly educated in the risks they're facing and all the challenges of a digital environment, rather than that we have to respond to more bullying or more fraud. That sort of thing requires creative solutions. That might be where collaborating with the private sector and more private sector bodies through corporate social responsibility programs going into schools and delivering that kind of education might be the kind of solution that should be looked at to address that gap. So it really is about the police through events like this and other events where you get to network with different types of people, building new relationships and also sharing police expertise with other sectors, and maybe starting to come up with creative solutions that way.
That's one more question from someone I think you know.
Professor Wakefield, Amy Clark from Fraud Advisory Panel. Thanks for that excellent insight. I'd love to have those slides actually, particularly the research. Question for you, linking into the last point there. I'm one of those very concerned that our STEM bright young things don't come into public service, they go into the private sector. A lot of them actually end up in banks, creating mathematical formulas for all manner of things that go out. We need them in, we need them in the sector where they can make new things. What do you think? You talked about where we're going with this, and in my talk I said about, we've got a situation where we really need some important things, like you mentioned, technology switched on in big tech, to stop and protect people. We need, I would say, we've written to the ministers and the chancellor and the secretary about putting in systems to make better protection of people online, not waiting for the police 6 months after. And they just won't do it. They won't publish, they won't change, they won't bring legislation in, they won't challenge. What are we supposed to do then as honest businesses who are faced with this problem if people just won't allow this to change? What do we do as a society?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of creativity from the police in recent years with tight budgets, haven't we? And something that I've noticed through my work through the Security Institute and with the security profession has been much better relations than ever before with government departments, with police forces. You know, I sat on the National Counterterrorism Business Independent Advisory Group, which the Met set up. You know, so they're sitting around the table with heads of corporate security and others, just to address that knowledge gap between the public and private sector. And it did start to feel like, you know, that there was a real change taking place, that, you know, police leaders have been starting to be more creative where their budgets are so stretched, you know, and starting to connect a lot more with other agencies. And I think that's what you have to do when you don't have any money and you don't have any support from above.
Should police chiefs get a bit political and demand from the Home Secretary that big tech sort out their act and stop online crime sort of thing? Should they get a little bit more vote pushback?
That's a really, really difficult one. You know, and we're
know it's wrong.
Yeah. Well, this is a debate that's happening in the UN General Assembly between the East and the West on the future governance of the internet, with the cybercrime resolution passed in 2019 that the West argued against, but it was led by Russia and backed by China, and you know, and so those countries are taking the lead and setting out what they want the internet to look like, and there's a worry that it will provide cover for authoritarian states and criminals, and, you know, not do what we would like it to do. Well, I mean, there isn't just that consistency of view of the internet, but yeah, there is a libertarian ideology behind the internet, which comes from its origins in the US, and is it going to be popular opinion that ultimately changes things rather than politics? You know, how much can or will politicians do? I honestly don't know the answer to that one, David. What's the position that you've been putting forward through the Fraud Advisory Panel?
We united with a number of tech leaders and counter fraud and said, bring in fail to prevent offence or fraud.
Yeah.
Should be brought to people apparently. Bring in whistleblowing protection, it's backed up by law to protect people.
Yeah.
And make in the online harms bill, let's talk with the Home Office, trying to push for include fraud.
Yeah.
Because big tech allowing advertising and so on their platforms, money laundering. That money is money laundering, but they make 80% of their profit from ads from fraudsters. So I don't know. We're a charity, not an expert, but I wonder if certain, you know, police chiefs and others who see this spoke up. Done it before. Shoplifting and burglary and things. Speaking up, you know, not being political.
Yeah.
Explain the problem. I'm probably your view of the rest of the audience. Or should we be more vocal? Because nobody's listening to me.
Yeah, but also not just highlighting problems, but trying to come up with solutions that, and then getting support for those solutions.
Can I take Alison off the hook a little bit here? Suggest perhaps, Dave, we would take that maybe in one of our, certainly probably the second one, the legitimacy debate. Alison, thank you so much for that.